Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to all of you. It is my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the delegation of Prague to the European Union at the Prague House tonight for this year's conference, Václav Havel European Dialogues. And it is a true honor for the delegation of Prague to the EU to host this event this year. And we are also glad we could become one of the partners of the event together with the main organizers, permanent representation of the Czech Republic to the European Union, Embassy of the Czech Republic to the Kingdom of Belgium, Václav Havel Library and the Czech Center, Brussels. This year's conference is, of course, a part of the accompanying program of the Czech presidency in the Council of the European Union. And with the great speakers we have here tonight and with the interesting topic we have, the democracy and the new geopolitical situation in Europe, I'm absolutely sure we have a truly interesting event ahead. And you are, of course, welcome to take an active part by asking questions and giving out comments. But before we begin with the panel that will be introduced by Michaelem Žantovským, moderator of tonight's event, I have the honor to welcome here two distinguished guests who will deliver opening speeches. It's Her Excellency Edita Hrdá, permanent representative of the Czech Republic to the European Union, and His Excellency Pavel Klucký, ambassador of the Czech Republic to the Kingdom of Belgium. And as first, I would like to ask Mrs. Hrdá.
Good evening, honorable guests, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Madam Director, thank you for letting this lovely space for this year dialogues. It is the 10th edition already here in Brussels, and we are very pleased that we are welcoming more and more people which are eager to participate in these discussions. Let me say that this time, during the Czech presidency, we have here, and this is great honor, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jan Lipavský, but also we have here Secretary General of the European External Action Service, Stefano Sannino. Welcome very much, Stefano. We have here also, I have to say, Olena Halushka, member of board of the Ukrainian Anti-Corruption Action Center. And we have here, it's my pleasure to welcome you, Jan Lesser, Vice President of the Brussels office of the German Marshall Fund of the US. And of course, we have Michaelem Žantovským here, who will then lead us during this all evening. And we are still waiting for David McAllister, member of the European Parliament and chairman of the Committee of Foreign Affairs, who is still in the Parliament, but he comes a bit later. So the world changed. Of course, this is the week which is important for the Czech Republic because it's already 33 years when the Velvet Revolution started. And we always organize these events very close to this very important day, the 17th of November. Because it is a Czech presidency, so we prepared all month of different events. And let me invite you all, not only this 17th, close to the European Parliament, to the bench of Václav Havel, where we will organize an event, a happening. There will be exhibition also in the Czech permanent representation. But also let me invite you for the screening of the film Painted Bird, an exhibition of photographs from Terezín Ghetto on the sidelines of the Conference of Anti-Semitism, November 24th, to the exhibition of paintings by Ukrainian girl, which is called How My Government Took Home Twice, in the tent on the Schumann around about December 7th. And we will be ending, and this is why I am saying all these, with the screening of the film Havel at the Beaux-Arts Art Center, December 8th. So these are our plans for this whole month. And now let's start the dialogues.
Before, His Excellency Pavel Klucký will continue with opening speech.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Minister, Excellencies. I have the pleasure to address you for the fourth time here in Brussels today, because these dialogues are dedicated to Ukraine. I would like to draw your attention to the leaflet you did receive when you entered. So this is what you received, and this is our campaign for raising money for the medical care for Ukrainian through the United 24. This is the official Ukrainian platform for raising money, and this is the initiative by the Ukrainian bilateral embassy here in Brussels in cooperation with our embassy. So please don't be shy, because as you know, people in Ukraine are defending also our democratic values. So, and I will stop here, because ahead it's very important discussion, and I don't want to stand in between. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. And now let's begin with the panel, and I will give the floor to Michael Žantovský, who will guide us through.
Thank you, Madam Director. It's a great pleasure to be here. And let me first give you a few words about the background of this. The European Dialogues of Václav Havel are one of the core projects of the Václav Havel Library in Prague that we have been organizing since 2015. And we held conferences twice a year, one in Prague in the spring and one in Brussels in the fall. But this year it's an especially meaningful year of the Czech presidency in the Council of the European Union, and we have been invited by the Minister of the Czech government for European affairs and by the Czech centers to become involved in events on the margin of the presidency. And thus it has happened that we are organizing 21 European dialogues in 21 European cities during the 6 months of the presidency, and today is one of them. We have also been involved in thinking about the motto for the presidency, and as we all know, the Czech Republic finally came up with a Havelian motto, Europe as a Task. Europe as a Task was the title of Václav Havel's speech in Aachen in 1996 on the occasion of the presentation of the Charlemagne Prize. And in the speech, Havel explained what he understood to be the task of Europe, and he conceived of it in a somewhat different way from politicians of the day and even politicians of today. He argued that the task for Europe is no longer to be more powerful than other parts of the world, to expand itself and its culture and its might into other parts of the world. On the contrary, he claimed that the task for Europe is to be the best it can be in staying true to its values, to its principles, and serve as a model, if you will, rather than as a tutor or a dominator or hegemon. And I think this is 16 years ago. No, it's 26 years ago. And I think these words are perhaps more topical today than they were then. The question for the panel, and I'm so happy I have such a distinguished panel, is in what way has the Russian aggression in Ukraine changed European thinking? And I, of course, am just a moderator, so I will not try to provide the answers, but maybe as a food for thought, I will suggest several directions in which our thinking might evolve on Europe. And welcome, MEP McAllister. Thank you for coming. You've already been introduced by our permanent representative to the European Union. So, how has the European thinking, how is it changing after the events in Ukraine? And I would suggest that one way it may be changing is in regards to the discussion about the European strategic autonomy. You know, over the past few months, we have all realized that we need more autonomy in the areas of energy and economy, that we need to be able to rely on our own sources of energy, particularly the renewables, and in some parts, perhaps also the nuclear energy. And on the other hand, on defense and security issues, I think we realize that we may need a larger framework than European strategic autonomy, that we would be in a disadvantaged position vis-à-vis Russia if we relied on Europe alone, and that we need cooperation with our allies and friends across the Atlantic and with our allies and friends in the United Kingdom to be able to stop the Russian aggression. So, in other words, the West is back. The third aspect of changing our thinking is obviously on Russia. I mean, Václav Havel used to say that Russia does not know where it begins and where it ends. And I think today we may be realizing that what he had in mind was not an ethnic definition or a national definition, that it was a geopolitical definition. Vladimir Putin goes on again and again about the Russian world. And I think we realize that what he has in mind is not a world of people who speak Russian or who are ethnically Russian, but a concept of politics and power and organization of society which is absolutely aligned to our way of thinking and something that we have to take a stand up against. And finally, identity. Václav Havel has, although he was a stalwart European and Europeanist, he sometimes critiqued and complained about the lack of identity in the European Union and insisted that our identity cannot come only through treaties, directives, and regulation. And this makes me think at this point in time that that in history, national and even supranational federal identities have almost invariably evolved as a result of catastrophes, of wars, of crises of a kind. So maybe we should be able to perceive this latest crisis as an opportunity to forge a real European identity, and to do so will take courage, solidarity, and principles, but I think it is in our power to achieve this. And so you are not duty-bound to speak about the topics I just mentioned. You can choose your own topic, but I will start with Minister Lipavský to give us his thoughts on how the European thinking has changed. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. And thank you very much to all of you for coming here today to Prague House. It is my pleasure that tonight we are starting a series of events organized by our permanent representation to the EU on the topic of human rights, and we called it proudly Human Rights Month. It's most of that will happen in the last month in December, but I think it's very timely to start a little bit prematurely. Since the 17th November, it's a very important day in the modern Czech history. Twice it was very important for our history. First, when the students were harshly persecuted during the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia, and that created the International Students' Day. And for the second time, it was the Velvet Revolution, which started more than 30 years ago in Prague and was the beginning of the modern freedom Czechoslovakia and then Czechia. And here we are, members of the EU, members of NATO, proudly celebrating human rights and reminding the importance of that. And it was President Václav Havel who was the founder of the modern Czech foreign affairs and international relations, and who very rightly pointed that the issue of human rights needs to be on Czech agenda basically every day, and it needs to be integral part of our foreign affairs. And I'm very proud that we do this kind of events when we can remind it. And of course the presidency, the Czech EU presidency gives another possibility to highlight the importance of this issue. And you said it very rightly. We are in a situation where quite a lot of things is changing, and we need to remind, and Russia is reminding us in a very brutal way, that values are not given, and we need to be able to fight for them. We need to be able to protect them. And basically that would be my answer. How is our thinking changing? We realized again. We realize what the generation of, I would say, grandfathers and grandfathers realized through the brutal experience of the Second World War. We are realizing this again, and the price is being paid by Ukrainian nation, which decided very rightly to fight for its freedom, for the sovereignty of your country, for your territorial integrity, and you made a choice that you don't want to be colony ruled from Moscow. Whatever it would be statehood, they annexed you, whatever they would do with you, kill your people, steal your children, steal your property or destroy it. And you made a choice that you want to be part of Europe, that you want to be part of what I personally call civilized world of the EU and NATO, and I think you made the right choice. We could say it was a mistake from the West that we are not able to stop it in Georgia in 2008. We are not able to properly stop it in 2014 when the theft of Crimea and Donbass happened. But that's reality. We were not able to push this agenda ahead since Russia was still able to discuss with us, have a dialogue on many issues. Important trade also went on. And now everything is very different. The debate about European strategic autonomy, even though it has a different meaning from different point of views, is there. It is a relevant debate. And I will be always calling for the US to be part of on this equation too. So many things has happened. It's not only the European thinking which is changing. We also, as a Europe, need to be working on the thinking of the whole world. There was one very important produce of the Second World War, which was the Charter of the UN. And even it's 80 years old and someone could call it obsolete, there is quite very important principle that the borders are not changed by force. And to attempt to change borders by force is called a criminal act of aggression. And that's what is going on right now. And we need to find enough states in the world and change their thinking that this is something bad and needs to be prosecuted. And we need to find a way how to do it. So I don't want to be longer than that. I think this is how our thinking has changed, that we opened our eyes, and it's not only a few states in the Eastern Europe screaming that Russia is a danger, but we really agree on that. And of course, as I said very often, Europe is a debate, and division, the EU is unity, because that's what was agreed. So I think this is very important that nowadays we have a lot of unity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. If you allow me, I will start with us EU people before giving the floor to our guests here. So the European thinking is changing. How about this thinking of the European External Action Service? We have the Secretary General Stefano Sannino here, a man with a long and distinguished diplomatic career. So could you enlighten us?
Yes, changing alongside with the whole rest of the European Union. We are not a special beast. Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation. I have to say that when we were speaking before the presidency with Edita, and she was explaining the, in a way, what the motto, and she was explaining to me a lot about Havel and the influence of Havel in the thinking, and it is, I think it's a little bit of emotion that I'm there, because I do realize how much this is important for you, but also how much this is important for democracy in Europe. So thank you very much for this invitation. I think that you just said already quite a number of things, but I will start maybe with the one point that the minister has just made, that the first thing that we have all waken up at a certain point, that democracy is not a given, and that we have to be able to defend our democracy, defend our multilateral order, defend the way that there are some rules, defend the fact that it cannot be just the force dominating international relations and the world, but there must be something more solid and based on democratic values. And from there, I would say a second element that comes to my mind is the fact that democracy has a cost, and we need to be able to face the cost of democracy and to stand the cost of democracy. You were speaking about our strategic autonomy. The minister was rightly saying there are many interpretations of strategic autonomy. I won't enter into this, but I would say that it is true that first of all we have realized that again we need to be able to avoid that the dependencies that we may have created over time could become vulnerabilities for our societies. I think that this is something that we all agree on that. There again, I'm giving a lot of reason, Minister. I mean, when we developed the first strategy on energy back in 2016, we had already identified all the problems and identified all the solutions. Pity that we not implement them. And so after 6 years, we had to rush to do this with all the impact that is having on our societies, on our economies, on the life, on our life, and we all feel a little bit the need to contribute to this, not eating too much, having a bicycle rather than a car, doing a number of things which are changing also our daily life. But I think that the point of the vulnerability is very important, because now it's important when it comes to Russia and to the fact that we have decided to decouple from the energetic point of view. But it leads us to think also about the future and about other potential challenges that can come from other parts of the world. The second element, and you mentioned that, Michael, is the point of the effort that we need to make in terms of security and defense. For too long, we have thought that there would have been someone else coming to rescue in case of need. And I think that we need to be able to understand that we need to contribute to this. I'm not saying, and on this I fully agree, on the fact that when we think about the security, I have an inclusive vision, which is not opposing the European Union to the United States or to other partners, but on the contrary, that somehow friends have become much closer than they used to be before. And so we need to work together, but in this friendship we are also to contribute to the work. And I think that what we have been doing, what has happened in Finland and Sweden is absolutely striking. But also what has happened in Denmark is remarkable, as the decision that has been taken by almost all European governments to step up with the defense expenses. So once again, I mean, to conclude this long point about the cost of security, this is one important component that we need to include in the equation of our future work. One other thing that I think that this crisis has shown is that the globalization in political and security terms has come to the fore. Paradoxically, while we are giving away globalization, economic globalization, because we are going much more into, let's say, much closer and diversified supply chain, so the idea of one single chain of values that is linking the whole world, and that is based on the fact that we share the same feelings, is gone. And I do not want to speak about friend-shoring or near-shoring or other ways of getting closer to us, the supply chains. But on the other hand, the security theater has become one. You have, and we all will have in mind UK or US, but I also think a lot about Japan and about South Korea, about a number of other countries in Asia, because the Atlantic and the Pacific are much more united, integrated than they used to be before. The threats to our security when it comes to hybrid threats or to cyber threats or to disinformation have no borders, and they can come from countries which are also very much far away. So we are discovering much more our friends. We need to cultivate them much more. It's challenging because, I mean, there is always all these relations have a bilateral nature, so we must care about them and they must care about us. And I hope that what is happening, what has happened is producing these results. One final remark on identity, because it's something that it's very true, but we need to get it right. Because the risk of identity may turn easily into nationalism or into populism. So we need to be careful that when we speak about our identity, we are able to see us as multi-identity personalities that are able to reconcile our national and our European, but also our broader identity in terms of persons that believe in democracy, that believe in the rule of law, and that are trying to promote and foster all these elements in the different theaters, in the different dimensions, and they are all important and complementary one to the other.
Thank you so much, Secretary General. The European Parliament is one of the three main bodies and agents of the European Union, and it these days has to deal with not one crisis, but a perfect storm of crises that popped up over the last 3 years. We have a war raging to our east, a war of aggression waged by Russia against the nation of Ukraine. And at the same time, we have the COP27 summit in Sharm el-Sheikh taking place and deciding about the next steps in fighting the climate change. Now, my question for a very prominent representative of the European Parliament, the chairman of its Foreign Affairs Committee, David McAllister, is there any sense in the Parliament that in view of these crises, as our capacities and capabilities are stretched to the extreme, we might have to re-examine some of our priorities, or maybe at least the schedule for some of our priorities? Please.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me, and please apologize that I was late. I was held up in the European Parliament. I had informed the organizers I would try to be here at 6:15, so I'm 50 minutes late, which for a German is a total no-go. I know, so please blame it on my British background that I was 50 minutes late. First of all, I can fully underline what Jan and Stefano have just said. I would like to make the following comment. My wife and I are proud parents of 2 teenage daughters. And like your kids, our daughters learned at school modern European history from 1945 to 1990, and from 1990 to today. Their children, our grandchildren, will learn European history from 1945 to 1990, and probably from 1990 to 2022, because this 24th of February has changed everything. We in Western Europe say, we woke up in another world. Perhaps some in Eastern Europe might have already been awake before that. And this war changes everything. Because this is not only the largest country in Europe invading the second largest country in Europe. This is not only an imperialist war of aggression of one country against the other. And obviously, the Kremlin is following the bizarre concept of spheres of interest, that everything which used to be the Russian Empire or even the Soviet Union is kind of their sphere of influence, and they decide what happens here and what doesn't. This is a brutal, violent attack on the European peace and security architecture. And the big challenge for us will be, and Stefano, we've been talking about this and many others with Josep Borrell, how do we deal in the long run with the Russian Federation as long as a dictator and war criminal, Mr. Putin, is sitting in the Kremlin or one of his scholars? That will be the real big challenge for us in Europe. The answer is, it's been mentioned, strategic autonomy, or if you allow, since I'm from Germany, I prefer to use the term strategic sovereignty. But it doesn't matter how we call the baby, we know what it's about. And strategic sovereignty means we need to get our act together. We will have to do more for our own European security and defense. A lot of decisions have been taken that go in the right direction. The new NATO strategy on the one hand, and the strategic compass on the other hand. I would call on all of us, could we please now start implementing concretely the strategic compass? It might have to be updated, yes, but please, let's not start working on another strategic document. Enough paper has been printed. For me, the strategic compass is kind of a roadmap towards a European Defence Union. And the good thing about the strategic compass is it carries the signatures of all 27 heads of state and government. That was the huge achievement of the High Representative, to include the 27 big guys. But it's their document, and that they all have to deliver. I strongly advocate in favor of a European Defence Union, but never should our activities be in any way against NATO or in competition with NATO. It's about strengthening the European pillar within the NATO framework. That's why I also welcome that European initiatives like military mobility are open to non-EU partners like the United States, Canada, Norway, or the United Kingdom. So European security and defense, that means we will have to spend more on defense, and we will have to spend it more effectively. Second point, strategic sovereignty means we need to get our act together on energy. Especially my home country, Germany, is in a rather difficult situation because for years we put all our eggs in one basket. And you should never put all your eggs in one basket, as the English say. We were far too heavily dependent on energy imports from Russia. Never ever should this happen again. We have to, take consequences, learn the very hard way now. It's difficult, but we will manage this if we show European solidarity. Strategic sovereignty for me is more than just security and defense and energy. It's about raw materials, supply chains, you name it. Now, you asked me what could perhaps change. I'm pretty sure that all people in this room know that since the 24th of February, everything has changed. I'm not sure if every person in this city actually knows that everything has changed. And there are some points where I would like to call on representatives of the Commission, the Council, also in our European Parliament. We also have to critically overview some of our existing policies. I'll give you one example. Food security is all of a sudden a real issue. We might be facing a real hunger crisis in the world, and that means that we in Europe need to step up our agricultural productivity. Is this fully in line with all details of the existing farm-to-fork strategy? May I dare to make at least a tiny question mark without being executed here? I think we need to really reconsider some of the proposals. And we are just debating some of them. For instance, the pesticide regulation, which the Commission proposed. Is that really the way forward? I have a few questions here. And another example to conclude. We need to get our act together also on trade. If we want to improve our cooperation with other like-minded partners, I think it is really overdue that we finalize in this parliamentary term the trade negotiations with Chile, with Mexico, with New Zealand, and also with Australia. We need to improve our cooperation with ASEAN. The ASEAN-EU summit on the 14th of December is a good opportunity for that. And we should also have a look after Brazilian elections, how far we can get on Mercosur. We really have to start diversifying also our economic activities around the world. And a final word, because Jan is here. Can I say something personally to the Czechs? You have until now really done a good show running the presidency of the council. That's hard work, I know. And I remember when you came to our committee at the beginning, we were going through the work program, and especially I would like to commend you Czechs, the way you organized the first meeting of the EPC. That this first EPC went well had a lot to do with the Czechs being good hosts and good organizers. So the Czech Republic is back in the European arena, and so many people, including in Germany, are so happy to see you back in the arena so actively, and please remain exactly like you're doing now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being so open and straightforward about the changes in thinking that we all might have to go through, and also for the kind words about us Czechs. You know, it's always good to hear. Among his several criticisms of the European Union, Václav Havel often dwelled on the unfinished nature of the European integration. And by this, he was thinking about the Western Balkans at the turn of the century, when the efforts at integrating that part of Europe have, largely as a consequence of the war in former Yugoslavia, have slowed down, and not much has happened since. But also to our east, in the countries of the former Soviet Union. And that, of course, brings me to our next speaker, Olena Halushka, who's a board member of the Ukrainian Anti-Corruption Center. You know, you already have a name that would go very well down in Slovakia or in the Czech Republic. You know, in Czech Republic we say Galuška, but in Slovakia you would get away with Haluška right away. So, but seriously, how much weight do the European aspirations play in the thinking of your government on the one hand, and of ordinary people in Ukraine on the other? What do you think you would benefit from membership in the EU? How long do you think it should take, or could take, or might take? And also, you know, Václav Havel always said that, you know, joining a body like the EU is not a one-way process, that we should try to also contribute ourselves to the integration in exchange for what we benefit from it. And speaking of that, you know, there's, you know, one obvious factor, what Ukraine could do to contribute to European food security that David McAllister just spoke about is almost unlimitless. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. If I may, I would probably try to give you a little bit broader perspective of Ukraine on the Russian war, on the future, on the thinking which we would expect from our international partners, and also touch upon the membership things, because it is very important indeed. Well, I would like to, well, my statement would very much resonate with what previous speakers said, that this Russian war is the imperialistic war of colonialism. But actually, Russian war aims to throw us back to centuries ago, where every ruler could have grabbed whatever they wanted, whatever they could afford, using their manpower and their firepower. To be alive, empires need to constantly expand. Russian war is about their will to conquer Ukraine fully. If they cannot conquer us, they aim to destroy us and kill us. Previously, Russia controlled Ukraine through corruption, through gas prices, through weak public administration, through agents of change inside different institutions, but also through the red lines in the heads of the Western decision makers who blocked our previous integration into the European Union and into NATO. Ukraine's decisive turn towards the European Union triggered the occupation of Crimea and parts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Then we've seen Minsk agreements, which were a temporary peace deal. Russia used that time to reinforce, replenish their stocks, prepare their military, and hit us much harder with the all-Ukrainian genocidal war. Russia is currently destroying post-World War II world order, and other dictators are very closely following, taking notes, and weighing in their plans for future. That is why this is not an exaggeration to say that this war will define the future of the world order. European countries have to face the truth and answer the question, which world you want to live in? The world where you are able to defend your values, or the world where any dictator could redraw the borders of other countries just because they have strong weapons? The lessons learned from Russian aggression, which I do not really know. I'm not in a position to speak whether they changed the thinking of the European community or not, but we as Ukrainians would very much want that to impact your thinking, are the following. First, bully understands only strength. Weakness is encouraging him. An attempt to not escalate is the best way to welcome further aggression. Finland's and Sweden's accession to NATO are the best example, and I'm not in a position to explain to you because you all know very well that background. Taiwanese officials tell us very explicitly, your victory is the best deterrent from Chinese aggression against us. Not a ceasefire, not a peace deal, victory. They understand it very well. Second, democracies have to be very well armed. Only that could be the precondition that you wouldn't need to be fighting on the battlefield to defend your values again. 9 months into the largest war, which is doing the biggest country in Europe against the second biggest country in Europe, as Mr. McAllister said, military industries of most of the countries are still working in the peacetime mode. Third, dictators stay united. They consider this war to be the beginning of the crusade of dictators against democracies in total, in general. Iran is not taking months to consider whether the ballistic missiles which they are preparing to send to Ukraine are the escalation or not, and what will be the response which that will trigger. No, they are producing them and sending them to Russia. Don't get me wrong. We are extremely grateful for all of the assistance which we are receiving from Western countries, including from the Czech Republic, including from the United States, which are one of the biggest donors of our assistance, including the European Union, yes. Thanks to that, we are currently, as I'm delivering this speech, liberating town by town, village by village in the Kherson region. But this is not enough for us to win this war decisively and fastly. So we very, very much ask the West to keep up this unity and to step up this assistance, because the munitions and the weapons are running out. We need modern weapons. We need modern tanks. We need modern jets. We need more howitzers, more MLRS, more longer range rockets. And believe me, as the anti-corruption activist or democracy fighter for the democracy, I do not really want, you know, to see the difference in all these weapons, but we have to, because that's the reality, everyday reality of Ukraine today. Fourth, Ukraine's strength as the democracy is our reforms and our institutions. And here finally comes the EU membership thing. 2 days before the invasion, President Putin gave his speech. And in that speech, he named basically all of the institutions which we, and my team in particular, have been working on since 2014. All institutions: National Anti-Corruption Bureau, Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, High Anti-Corruption Court. He even talked about the judicial reform and foreigners whom we engage in this reform. Institutional resilience is exactly the thing which helped us, besides the bravery of the Ukrainian society, to withhold the ground and last much longer than the 3 days which most of the best world intelligence were predicting us at the very beginning. European Union played extremely important role for that, and most of these institutions were built thanks to Visa Liberalization Action Plan, macro-financial assistance, IMF programs. We received EU candidate status, and beside the a huge boost to the morale, which is supported by the 92% of Ukrainians. This is a very practical and extremely effective tools of the reforms advocacy, because we as the civil society will be taking accession process and all of the reforms that are linked to this accession process, and we will make our government do these reforms. And believe me, with the support of 92% of Ukrainians, they will do everything which the European Union will ask them to do. And Ukrainian reforms and Ukrainian resilience is the striking contrast to Russian rotten military, in which much more funds have been invested than in the Ukrainian military, but largely in vain. Long live the corruption in the Russian army, as we say, but we also have to understand that they learn very well from their mistakes. If they are given time right now to reinforce, replenish their stocks, they will close all these loopholes and they won't repeat these mistakes anymore. Fifth, peace cannot come at any price. And that's something which sounds really very weird from the mouth of the Ukrainian. And I have to make a disclaimer: Ukrainians don't like dying. We do not like suffering. We want peace, believe me, more than anyone in this continent. But we want the sustainable peace, because we have already seen the Minsk agreements, which was the temporary peace deal, and it was just the 7 years for Russians to replenish their stocks, to reinforce their army and hit us much, much harder. If we do not end this war with a full victory right now, we will see absolutely the same in a few years. We cannot afford this. Last, not last, the one before last, it is finally time for justice. After Chechnya, after Georgia, Ukraine, Syria, Ukraine, it's finally time to break this vicious circle of impunity and bring them to justice. In every liberated town, we are seeing an absolutely the same pattern. We are seeing mass graves, we are seeing torture prisons, we are seeing raped women and kids, we are seeing a long list of people kidnapped, long list of people abducted, long list of the deportations. This is absolutely the same, but all of these war crimes, they are secondary from the crime of aggression. And here I would like to commend very much Czech Republic, because I know that you are championing the issue of the establishment of the International Tribunal for Aggression. We think that this is super important, because today's genocidal war against Ukraine is the consequence of the lack of accountability for all of the previous Russian war crimes. And we expect European Union, G7 countries to be a platform, because United Nations with the Russian blocking vote and Chinese blocking vote obviously cannot be platforms for that. And now, last but not least, probably the most important, help us win. We are capable of winning, and we will this war. We will win this war. The question is only when and at which price. Because this is not only morally right to support the nation of 40 million people whose only guilt was that we wanted to have a decent life, free of corruption, free of Russia, with the rule of law, with the market economy. But this is also our only, as humanities, chance not to allow further aggression across entire world as the domino effect. Thank you so much for being with us. Please help us to keep mobilizing this support and help us to win this war faster. Thanks.
And amen to that. It's thank you so much, Olina. It's not that I think most people in this room are keenly aware of the realities that you just described, and 100% supportive of what you need to do and what needs to be done to stop this senseless aggression. But it, I think, pays to repeat it again and again to our publics and to the media and the public opinion, because it also stems from some of the Václav Havel's thinking. I mean, his views on security issues and foreign policy issues were largely shamed by the main trauma of his generation, and that was the trauma of the Munich Agreement. So he, in his writings and in his speeches, he repeats it again, you know, to back down before an aggressor invites him to escalate the aggression. And it must not, we must not do it. And he also believed in some kind of, he always called it coping with the past, of some kind of post-conflict justice on any situation which includes atrocities and crimes against peace and crimes against humanity, as the Russians have amply demonstrated. We present the Václav Havel Award for Human Rights every year together with the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and we just had the ceremony last month and the conference to go with that, and the conference was called The Crime and Punishment. And it was all about, we had the Chief Justice of the International Criminal Court and other international lawyers to speak about the formats and the ways to bring the perpetrators to justice after you win the war, and I'm sure you will win the war. So I got excited, but rightly so. But last, not least, certainly, we have a man of two feathers, so to speak. Ian Lesser, who's the Vice President of the German Marshall Fund and the Executive Director of its Brussels office, and who's been a member and a thinker in all the important think tanks and thinking facilities of the, if not of the Western world, certainly of the United States. Now, how does this war affect thinking in the United States? And will the thinking be changing again after the midterms, or will you stay the course, or the United States will stay the course? Give us some ideas.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much indeed. It's great to be with you. And I'm not sure I've been in all of the think tanks in the United States, but I've been in a few. But let me just maybe make 3 points to you. And to answer your question, frankly, you know, there's, I think, very little difference in my perspective, at least, from what we've already heard. You know, the United States is fully a stakeholder in all the things that we've been discussing. And so, you know, you started with a quote from Václav Havel about Europe having a task. In fact, transatlantic partners have a task, have tasks, and they're not very much different. You know, the first point I would make, and this has already been said in different ways, is that the Ukraine war, I mean, it does in a sense change everything, David. I agree with you very much about that. I think, you know, clearly in terms of the complacency about conflict, the fact that hard power actually matters, not the only thing that matters, but it matters a lot. Also, I would say coming to grips with a kind of ruthlessness in international affairs. You know, there's so much thought that's gone into deterrence and other things, which never really priced in ruthlessness. There was rationality or an absence of rationality. There were rational actors in crazy states and all the rest of it. But the truth is, we hadn't really reckoned with ruthlessness. We haven't, certainly in Europe, we haven't seen ruthlessness since the end of the Second World War. You know, even we could argue about the behavior of the Soviet Union in various respects for sure, and in this room no one needs reminding. But still, it had a slightly different quality to it, ruthlessness. Strategic autonomy, let me say something about that, to give an American perspective, or at least an American perspective, and you'll find a debate about this. I think, frankly, however you want to define this, what has changed now is are the parameters. The utility clearly is there, whether you're talking about autonomy or sovereignty, but it can't just be a philosophical, aspirational discussion anymore. Again, I'm giving you a kind of American perspective. It has to have a practical, you have to spend money, you have to do things, you have to do it together, it has to be done with NATO. It can't just be a matter of aspiration and philosophy. I think, put that way, this will have a lot of friends in Washington. Certainly will today. We can speculate in years to come about political changes in the United States. It's not our topic here, but frankly, I think there is a core of American interest in seeing that happen. It's just a basic burden-sharing interest. I mean, to follow on from some of the comments that you made, I think, you know, there is a very big risk that we need to reckon with, which is that while we're looking for victory for Ukraine, for sure, this may be protracted. Let's not kid ourselves. And all along the way, there will be an accumulated risk simply of things going wrong. It doesn't have to be about deliberate escalation. It can simply be about things going wrong that winds up engaging NATO member states with Russia in a direct way. That could happen tomorrow. It could happen the week after. It could happen in many different settings. So I think we need to think about that risk. Second point: gray areas are a risk in their own right. I think, if anything, this experience, what we're experiencing today, shows it matters whether you're in or you're out. Finland, Sweden, in a different way, Denmark. The unfinished business in the Western Balkans, I think it has put the question of whether you're in or you're out at the front of everybody's mind in a very, very sharp fashion, and it matters. It will matter, you know, when and if Ukraine wins. NATO, think about it in this term, leave aside the EU for the moment, will have the largest, best equipped, most experienced force in Europe knocking at its door. What are we going to say? What are we going to say? That's not a theoretical issue, given the experience that we have today. I think we have to look even further. We haven't yet really talked about the question of reconstruction. I come from an institution that is in its DNA the Marshall Plan. It's the 75th anniversary of the Marshall Plan. People talk about a Marshall Plan for Ukraine. There's a symbolic value to that vocabulary. But what does it mean at base? At base, it's an argument about scale, it's about strategic purpose, and it's about transatlantic partnership. And that's what's going to be required at a very, very great level on the reconstruction side. And it's not too early to start thinking about that in a serious way. Obviously, it's being done, but a lot more could be done. Third, just finally, just on the transatlantic aspect per se, we did our transatlantic trends survey this year again. It's very clear that on all of the issues we've been talking about, the public has woken up. The public understands. They understand the risks. They understand the value of solidarity across the Atlantic. They understand the value of the EU and NATO in that context. And I think, Europe at the moment is frankly very lucky to have a transatlantic partner in Washington that not only takes this partnership seriously, but takes the EU seriously as a partner. You see it from planning around sanctions to many, many other things. That has not always been the case in multiple administrations, actually, I think will agree. And that's an important window to take advantage of, not least, and I'll just end by saying there was a brief mention of China. The United States can't avoid China. No one else can either. But this question of whether the United States pivots to Asia, which will affect Europe directly, it used to be thought of as a kind of long-term problem of adjustment. It may not be a long-term problem of adjustment. Something could go wrong in the Indo-Pacific next week that would accelerate this tremendously and perhaps interact in some ways with the war in Ukraine. It's just another reason why, in a sense, I fully agree with the notion that it's changed everything. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ian. It's a lot of food for thought. Well, it's not the role of the moderator to make things easy for his panelists. So let me try to ask a couple of awkward questions. One is about, what the practicalities that you've just mentioned. I think the greatest thing about all of us and you across the pond since the start of the war has been, the solidarity, the capacity to come together and to provide effective assistance to Ukraine. And, most of these are intangibles. We were, except for the military aid, we were great on intangibles. On the tangibles, we have the Green Deal objectives. We have a massive energy industry transformation to achieve. We are trying to help the 4 million refugees from Ukraine, most of them in the eastern part of the continent. We are thinking about the reconstruction, and we know we have to act on increasing our military and security capacities. Where do we take money for all that? We are in a high inflation period. Our budgets are nothing to write home about. So where do we take the resources to do all these things? So that's my first question, and I will shut up after I ask my second question, which is also an awkward question. And you and David have been also touching upon that. It's not just that we came together as quote unquote the West in against the aggression. It's also that, especially lately, it seems that the non-West or the non-democratic part of the rest of the globe is coalescing around the aggression, in part China, although lukewarm so far, but still Iran, North Korea. Is there a scenario that it might develop into a global confrontation with, the West and the rest, or is that even imaginable? And it's a free for all now. Minister.
Maybe I will pick up on the first question, and the second one I'll leave to speakers where every word is not weighted with certain scrutiny in regard of threats, and they can be more open. You mentioned tangibles. I think there is a long list of tangibles what Europe is doing in regards to help to Ukraine, and yesterday we had a dinner at the Polish embassy, and it was focused on the EU enlargement, and there was a representative of the Commission too, and basically the debate went, there was a long list of deliveries, and we are doing this and we are doing this, and then I said, it's not important how much we are doing. It is important that Ukraine will win. And that's what should and need to drive our thinking, because there is a huge list of needs. Some of that is covered by us, some of that is covered by the US, thankfully, and many other partners. And we know that winter will come, that we need to help the Ukrainian energy infrastructure. We know that even the huge Kherson success, when you look at the map, it's just a small piece of occupied territory still. So definitely, if not some kind of black swan events which is quite hard to predict and to rely on, we need to be ready for the heavy and long haul, and that needs to be our policy, basically.
So will we have to prioritize?
We don't need to prioritize. Maybe you finish your question where we take the money. There's only one source for government of taking money, and I think that looking at the Czech Republic, we did the unthinkable thing. We have a serious proposal on sectoral taxation, banks, and many other industries, because we need to find the funds to cover for the price of energy crisis. But of course, and speaking budgetary, the help to Ukraine doesn't create the biggest pieces of our expenditures. It's those expenditures connected to energy crisis, which are the huge sums really taking bite into our budget. And we are doing a fair share even for Ukraine. So.
Thanks. We are very grateful for the money which are obviously coming from the Western taxpayers, but we are calling you to make the political decision and to confiscate Russian frozen assets. Because we know the issues with the sovereign rights, we know the issues with the legal procedures, but we also, to be frank, do not really see the political will to look for the solutions, to look for the possible ways on how to get this money recovered and sent to Ukraine, because there are around $350 billion of the Federal Reserve Bank funds, and there are also money of the Russian oligarchs, which are not actually money of the Russian oligarchs, which are money of Putin, but sent to the West through his wallets. That is why, it is obvious that at a certain point, Western taxpayers will start asking why we should be paying for Ukrainian defense. And Western governments who are sitting on this money that are frozen and not moving forward have to take political decision, because these are Russians who have to be paying for what they have destroyed in Ukraine, not Ukrainians and not Western people.
May I pick up on your second question? You know, I think there are a number of different things going on, and if you look outside of you know, the West, if you like, but even within the West in some places, there is a complicated debate. And if you go to places like Brazil or South Africa or India, you know, it's a very complicated debate. I think broadly shared is the idea that, you know, territorial integrity matters, borders shouldn't be violated, sovereignty counts, all of this. I think what in many places leaderships are not buying, and there are some examples closer to home, is the notion that we are in a kind of broader struggle between democracy and autocracy. You know, we may in this room largely agree that that's a driving element in all that we're discussing. It's not the only one. But I think when you go to the global south, a lot of people simply aren't buying this. And so we need to think, you know, how much of that discomfort are we okay with, frankly, because it is not a comfortable debate in much of the world.
Please? The second one?
Please.
Very much in line with what Ian was saying. I think that I don't know. I mean, it's very difficult to predict the future, what is going to happen, which are the different variables that will come into the equation. And we were mentioning China and what could happen in Taiwan. I mean, many elements. But I think that we need to be able to realize that we now speak about the European Union, but maybe also broadly speaking the G7, let's put this way, so the light-minded. We do not have an interest to increase the polarization. There is, I mean, I think that progressively there is more and more a sense of wall which is dividing into autocracies, democracies. And there are a number of countries who are sitting on the fence and waiting to understand which is for them which is more interesting and more relevant. I mean, there is a lot of discussion that has gone through into the attitude in general of the global South. Excuse me if I'm speaking in sort of journalistic terms. And I think that we do not have an interest to, let's say, to move into this, because then in this sort of race, the West is a little bit more complex, and our offer comes with a lot of elements of conditionality attached to it, a lot of strings, and even if it's more sustainable over time, politically sometimes not necessarily the most attractive. So we need to be able to work with in order to attract more. There are ideas that we have on the table. We speak about global gateways. We speak about a number of other elements of our strategy. David was recalling the trade agreements, what we do as Team Europe, the flagship projects. So we have a number of elements, but we need also to make it more concrete. Our offer is not as immediate as the one that other countries may have. Quick money, relatively easy to be given, and with no elements of conditionality attached to it. So we need to play a little bit skillfully about this, because otherwise we run the risk of dividing the world and not having necessarily everybody on our side.
I'll be brief and just make 2 points. The first one is on the transatlantic partnership. Joe Biden might be the last US president who will go into history as being a real European US president. We have to realize this as a matter of fact. And the US pivot to Asia will continue. And as Ian just said, it might happen much quicker than we all expect. That means, I'm repeating myself, we have to get our act together on European security and defense. And first of all, this means to provide more budget spending. Policy in the end is always about setting priorities and financial priorities. And if the member states don't give more money, in the end, everything will be empty talk. We have underfunded our military in so many of our member states in an irresponsible way. I'm saying this as somebody who served 2 years in the German military myself in 1989 and 1990. I was always concerned, always upset, regardless of who was in power in Berlin, how we underfunded our German Bundeswehr. We were not acting responsibly because after the UK and France, Germany's probably military-wise the number 3 in Europe. We were not doing enough. So if we move on European defense and security, and we will have to make major steps, as Stefano has pointed out, Franco-German cooperation will be at the core. Franco-German cooperation is not everything in Europe. And I know that people from other countries sometimes roll their eyes when Germans and French talk about Franco-German cooperation taking the lead. But I think we all agree, if there's no Franco-German close cooperation, not many things move forward in Europe. And that's why I also call on the governments in Paris and Berlin. Obviously, there have been some, how can I put it? Well, there have been a few problems in the last few weeks. We need to overcome them quickly because France and Germany need to be at the core together with other partners in the West and in the East, including our friends from the Czech Republic. So that's the one point. And the second point is, having been a minister-president of the German Bundesland and responsible for a budget of more than 20 billion euros a year, in the end, politics is always about setting priorities. Where do you want to spend more? Where do you want to spend less? Do you want to make additional debts or not? And also, where can you increase your income or find new sources of income, tax revenue? And here there's one other point where I would also ask the Commission very politely, please reconsider some of the planned legislation which is on the table in the moment. Our businesses, our industry are facing such enormous challenges because of the exploding energy prices, because of all the other issues we have to deal with, that I would kindly ask on any lawmaker, either here in Europe or in our member states, to please reconsider if additional red tape, additional bureaucracy, additional costs is really that what is required now in the year 2022, 23 and 2024. As long as this war of aggression is ongoing in Ukraine, we have to give all our support to Ukraine, and we have to help our businesses and our people get through the next 2-3 difficult winters. Our German President Steinmeier gave a speech to the German nation, preparing the Germans that the next few years have been very tough. I'm not sure that everyone in Germany listened carefully to our president, and that's why we need a reconsideration of some of the ongoing legislation. I'm sorry to say this, but I still hope that some people in the Commission will hear these alarm bells ringing.
Thank you. I have 3 follow-up questions. One is about the Russian property and abroad and the possibilities of confiscating it. And the minister may not know it, but I am in conversation with some of his close subordinates about the property that the Soviet Union has obtained in Prague during the time it occupied Czechoslovakia after August 1968. And and we agree on principles and on the historical facts, but then they call the lawyers, and the lawyers say, you know, don't go there. It's and by the same token, Olena, you know, how do we distinguish between the oligarchs, between the Putin oligarchs and the non-Putin oligarchs, because there are also some non-Putin oligarchs. Tinkoff is apparently these days a non-Putin, overtly non-Putin oligarch, and if we put them all into one basket, we will drive them closer to Putin. So how, I don't know the answer to that. I was flying to Madrid last week from Prague, and the plane was full of Russians. And I realized, not Ukrainians, I can tell the difference. And you realize you don't know who the Russians are. Are they, you know, the good Russians who are trying to get away from Putin, or are they, you know, Russians who are taking their money to Costa Brava while they still can? I don't know, but it's a problem. The second question, that's to David McAllister, and I'm terribly sorry, but I will utter the dirty word. The UK, right? UK. Yeah. How, you know, it seems to me counterintuitive to Brexit or no Brexit, to build a European defense and security autonomy without the more powerful military power in Europe. I'm sorry. And I think we should be able, and maybe I'm not entirely objective. I spent 6 years in London as an ambassador, but still, you know, are there not ways to open channels to talk about this to the Brits independently of the Northern Ireland Protocol and other issues that we have? And my last is to you, sir. You know, I'm not suggesting that we should go for a big conflict between two halves of the world based on ideological principles or any such thing. But I do remember that the last time this happened in the Second World War, you know, the situation was not entirely different. Large parts of the global south, you would say, were straddling the fence, and eventually they had no choice but to come down on one side or the other side. So I'm not talking about anything that we should be causing or advocating, but you know, it may happen that the other part of the equation or the other side, the authoritarian side, may force us to, you know, make these choices.
I can start. Well, I do not have a clear mechanism to offer to you, because otherwise I would assume that it would have been already implemented if there was such. But we all have to understand that law is a very dynamic issue. International law is a very dynamic issue. And back in 1940s, when the entire international world order was built from scratch, there was no UN, there was no UN charter. It was all developed because there was political will to do this. Ever since, it has been developed more and more with all this, you know, different human rights issues, protection of women and all of the others group. And my message is that Is there an instrument for the tribunal for aggression? No, not yet. Is there instrument for the confiscation of the Russian money? No, not yet. But what we are seeing right now is that this is being misused as an excuse of not working on that, because it has never happened. And that is why let's work on other issues. But I mean, let's also face that such a big genocidal war of Russia has never happened after the Second World War. This is the turning point, and either we all are creative and look for the solutions, or we miss the chance saying that, well, it's impossible, you know. I have to tell you that Ukrainians are doing impossible right now. We are doing counter-offensive while Russians are outnumbering us 5-6 times in artillery, in heavy weapons, in manpower. And we are not only defending our nation, we are moving forward, because that's the matter of survival for us. And if this is being perceived as the matter of survival to democracy, then I'm sure that there will be creative solutions which the law would be able to further get incorporated.
Thank you, Olena. I will just note that we have 10 minutes left, so please adjust to that.
Yeah, not an easy question you raised. And there's a clear political demand which sounds very reasonable, and then you hit the wall of lawyers. And yes, we build our society on the fact that the rule of law is something which is very, very in the very basic of that. I don't know what is the proper answer to that. What I know, that our dedication to rebuild Ukraine should not be limited by the fact that if we are able or not to able to find a proper answer to that question. We need to do it anyway. Definitely it won't be able to pay from those funds. Maybe the war will evolve in a way that Russia will acknowledge its actions and pay reparation. Maybe not. That's hard to predict. Once that happens, it would be everything much easier. But our dedication to rebuild and reconstruct Ukraine cannot be definitely limited by our ability to touch those possessions. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Very, very briefly, I don't want you to get me wrong. I'm not asking anybody to violate law. I mean, as somebody who has been fighting for the rule of law in Ukraine almost entire my professional life, I'm the biggest proponent of that. I'm just calling to adapt the law, yes, to the extraordinary circumstances in which we are operating.
And one, point of fact that I think that the lawyers often prefer to ignore. There's a general legal principle akin to the rotten tree theory, which says that any legal consequences of an act that was illegal at the beginning, to begin with, are null and void. There cannot be anything legal, legitimate stemming from that. And they don't like to talk about it. Please.
You asked about the UK?
Yeah.
Right at the beginning of the negotiations of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the EU27 made an offer to the British side. Let's include a big chapter on security and defense cooperation. Originally, the British were willing to do so. It didn't materialize. This is definitely an empty space in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. I hope that at a later stage it might be filled. But in the moment, things are as they are. There's a lot to criticize if you look at the government of Boris Johnson. But if there's one point where you can really commend the British, it is the remarkable support they have given and continue to give to Ukraine. And this just shows us once again that despite Brexit, the United Kingdom is a real partner. And the United Kingdom will remain a rock-solid NATO ally, a partner you can rely on when it comes to these existential threats of countries in Europe. So I do hope that we can move on EU-UK relations. We were in London last week, Monday, Tuesday, for the second round of the EU-UK Partnership Parliamentary Assembly. And I had the feeling, not only on the EU side, but also by many members of the House of Commons and the Lords, it was a bit strange that we were still discussing the nitty-gritty of the implementation of the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. Here also one fact applies. The world has changed since the 24th of February. And that's why if now Maroš Šefčovič, our responsible Vice President of the Commission, and the new UK Foreign Minister, James Cleverly, if they obviously are at good terms, let's see some real progress and let's get this done. I mean, I'm allowed to say as a Christian, for heaven's sake, let's really get these things off the table. If you look at the tragedies in Ukraine, and we are discussing with our British counterparts now for months and months, rather irrelevant details of food going from one way to the other on the island of Ireland. I think with goodwill and pragmatism we will find a solution, and then we can move on the other things, including the United Kingdom and the Horizon programme of the European Union and other things, and let's also get our act together on our cooperation with the British. And a final point, despite all we've done in Europe to support Ukraine militarily, one matter of fact is, it is the enormous American support which actually guarantees in the moment that the Ukrainians are trying to turn this war into a victory. And I would like to underline one point, because I often hear in my home country, Germany, in the debate, we have to make sure that Russia doesn't win this war. No, it's not about Russia not winning this war. It's about the brave Ukrainian women and men liberating their country and actually winning this war, because everything else would have severe consequences for us in Europe. We need to be aware of that.
Thank you for these words, Mr. Chairman.
May I?
Mr. Minister.
I would like to add one observation in regard of UK on foreign and defense issues. And, you know, Stefano Sannino is sitting next to me, our ambassador, permanent representative. Today we had a FAC, and when I met with my UK counterpart, and I will be in London, I am traveling to London tomorrow, and when I discuss with them foreign issues and defense issues, I am always surprised how much we are united, organized, and how much we are doing together. Any issue pop up into our discussions, and there's some kind of European solution, which the UK cannot be part of that, which they cannot cooperate, you know, directly because it's too complicated. So we live in this FAC world and cooperation, and we have a lot of discussions and divergences, and every journalist asks me, you know, what are the differences in Hungarian, etc. But at the end of the day, we are so much united, and it's so clear when I speak to my UK counterparts. So we need to be looking for topics to do with them, and we are very successful at that. And of course, their support to Ukraine is absolutely key. So I just wanted to have this observation from my position, which is sometimes too good to realize that how much we are united.
Well, maybe it's a... Oh.
20 seconds on the UK to say there's a lot that is going on foreign policy, security and defense. Fortunately, I would say we are not structuring in a sort of agreement because maybe the time is not yet right, but there is a lot of work going on. I mean, just to give you a sense, 3 days ago, I was in London and there were 3 managing directors, 3 of our director generals. You had been there the day before, so it's things are happening, and as you said, it is important that it does. On the other point, I'm not saying, I mean, it's if the future will bring a new, different sort of Cold War with the polarization, I mean, there is little that can be done in order, because I think that we will be on the one side of the story and on the other. I do not believe in the equidistance of Europe between let's say, the United States and other blocs. So on this, I want to be clear. But that said, I mean, we can try to work in the meantime to avoid that this polarization takes place or takes place too rapidly or takes place, let's say, if it does, there is some more cost that is being paid not only on our side but also on the other side. I think that we can do things in order to be able to prove and show that our system works better and delivers better for the citizens, and that's also a little bit our responsibility.
Well, I couldn't imagine better closing words. Ian, you wanted to? No, not at all.
Okay. Let you close. I'll offer you a closing word from a transatlantic perspective, since we just had an election in the United States. I think on the question of support for the military support for Ukraine, whatever the political future, I think that will hold up quite strongly in the United States. On the question of economic support and the reconstruction financing and so on, I think there is where you have to be a little bit more careful, and it can be, affected by political fortunes more directly. But if Europe does more, it'll make the case easier in Congress, for sure.
Understood. Ladies and gentlemen, these were the Václav Havel European Dialogues with David McAllister, Ian Lesser, Olena Halushka, Jan Lipavsky and Stefano Sannino. Thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience.